cover me. Hey!
You know what I mean? But listen, I don't expect anybody who put me in prison, if someone puts me in here, and the more polite I am to them and the kindness, the more I lay back, that's not going to make them take their foot off their neck. That's going to make you want to crush them more. If you're in a fight with somebody and you hurt them, the objective of the fight is not to back off and let them recoup. The objective is to smash into oblivion.
But the law says if you made a mistake, you rescind.
Whose law said that? The law of the United States?
Yeah.
Or who controls the law of the United States?
Legislatures?
Yeah, legislators that have their whole own agenda. Laws mean nothing. You give me the currency of a country and you can make all the rules in the world. And that's all that matters. Who's in control?
So then.
And we're recording. One moment. Okay. What's going on, everybody? Tonight, I have Tim Kelly as our guest. Tim is the host of Our Interesting Times podcast, which is dedicated to discussing historical and current events with an emphasis on promoting analysis and opinions that challenge the false reality created by the oligarchy. For the past 2 years, every Saturday, he does a show called Powers and Principalities with his buddy Joe Atwill. Joe being infamous for his book titled The Caesar's Messiah, a book about Jesus being a Roman psyop as a means that controls its citizens. Tim has had a murder's row of revisionists with such great guests as Jay Dyer, Ry Dawson, Collins Brothers, John Q. Publius, big fan of his, James Perloff, guys over at the Myth of the 20th Century, Dr. Eric Carlstone, and the late Dave McGowan. And a few guests we have had on the MGTOW Chat series, Dr. E. Michael Jones, Donald Jeffries, who is one hell of a guy, and our good friend here in the Manosphere and most frequent guest, Andy Nowicki. Tim, before I get into the meat of our conversation, I'd like to pay a bit of homage to you, since I don't think I would have ever started doing these podcasts, live streams, or started writing or going down this deep rabbit hole as much as I would have if it wasn't for your show. Spoiler alert to the listeners, a good portion of my work has been derived off of Tim's and your guest perspectives, where I've given it my own twist and analysis. It's a question I get often asked is, where the hell do I come up with these ideas or facts? A brief story on how I found you. I was living in Southeast Asia, where any type of internet connection is often spotty at best. Midday, there's a long lunch break and the city is dead, so I have really no place to go. So I would just sit in a coffee shop, do a little bit of work and read. Was surfing on YouTube, and one way or another, I found your channel and was able to download your episodes onto my phone. So every time I had no internet, wherever I was in Asia, running my motorcycle, getting stuck in a bus or in an airport, I always had an episode to listen to. When I got to listen to them in some of the most wackiest locations, it left some really nice memories for me that I will always treasure for the rest of my life. So I really want to thank you from the deep down inside, man. Really, thank you so much.
Oh, well, you're certainly welcome. That's why I started doing the podcast, just to part of it, I guess you could say part of it was a vanity project, part of it was also therapy. I decided to leap the technological hurdles and do it, and and as I think it's clear to most people, I'm not a professional, orator, or not a but I just kind of years and years of reading about this stuff, developing views, changing as the evidence led me to change views on these events. By the I guess it was 2015, I felt I was ready to do it, and the technology was there. It's amazing, that ordinarily I'd be talking about these things, into a mirror, and maybe a few friends at a pub or something. And now, I can make contact with authors and researchers and literally have an audience of thousands. I know that's trivial in the scale of things, but I figure if there are thousands, 100,000, a million people doing it, let 100 flowers bloom, as they say, and then it has an impact. And so as you testified, around you on the other side of the planet in a cafe in Cambodia or somewhere,
Yep.
or listening to me.
Yeah, it
talk
was
to
just
some
crazy.
author.
I
It's
had nothing
amazing.
to, I had nothing to do. I had no internet connection, and by accident I stumbled upon you, and you have that little music at the beginning that really, really captured me one way or another, and it gives like a really nice warm feeling when you play that
Yeah, I have
music
to.
at the beginning.
I have to thank the late Dwayne Allman for that. So
But it was cool because when I was in Asia and listening to you discuss politics and things that are going around the world, me being in a third world country, listening to you and your guest really opened my eyes to basically questioning things that have gone wrong in the United States. Living in a third world country, you can see how they operate things in a different manner, and you see the pros and cons to, a third world state where they're not as much indulged with consumerism and materialistic goods. It's more based around the community, and then looking at the United States where we're kind of atomized, the lack of solidarity and what have you, and you opening up this Pandora's box on why the way things are in the United States. And then when I came back to America, people are like, oh, you changed a little bit. What happened? What was it like over there? And listening to you, and then again going down the rabbit hole and such, obviously you don't really open up to the other because you start talking about things that are uncomfortable and naughty. Let it say, it gives you a different worldly opinion on such things.
yeah, that's an interesting perspective. You being either a tourist or expat, experiencing that, and most Americans don't get that experience. A lot of Americans, have done, they'll go to Mexico or something, but it's close to the home country.
Going on a cruise.
You go on a cruise or something, yeah.
Yeah, most Americans don't leave America, which is and that's not a bad thing. But someone from Oklahoma who's never really met someone from China, they're more interested. Like, oh, where are you from? What do you do? They don't really understand what that person's really truly about, whatever their religious affiliation or what their upbringing was, whether the descendants of a communist genocide and things like that. All those things play a factor into one's psyche. And Americans, unfortunately, we're kind of getting a taste of what totalitarianism is the past year or so.
Yeah, and it's the chickens might be coming home to roost, as they say.
So basically, you started your show just out on a whim, just for fun. Is that basically how it started? Did you do any writing? Did you have a blog spot prior to doing Our Interesting Times?
No, nothing like that. It was just after a while. Again, I used to listen to other programs, and I guess there was probably this after 2009, 2010. I started listening to various podcast programs. That term became familiar to me, aware of it, and I started noticing that on the internet you were getting analysis and insight and discussions that you just wouldn't hear on the networks, the cable and networks. And
we used to. There was a time, C-SPAN used to do a lot of really cool chats with people like Jared Taylor, for instance. They used to have these basically bringing up different political views that were against the mainstream. I think with the one show, Phil Donahue, I think was his name. He used to bring.
Phil Donahue,
he used to bring a lot of really cool guests on, and it was good for the general population to hear something that they don't normally hear on things like CNN or 60 Minutes, CBS, and then I guess around maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, especially during 9/11, there was basically just a boilerplate narrative, Democrat bad, Republican good. So,
yeah.
And it's like, and that,
the
the
C-SPAN
whole
used to have like Gary Webb was on C-SPAN.
Gary Webb, that's right.
Yeah, and there was always the cable access shows, which were always low quality, but they could, you get some really interesting shows on. You see them now on YouTube. Some of these cable access, they're probably being purged now. When I started on YouTube, that was YouTube's golden era.
Yeah.
When there wasn't any censorship. And
Yeah,
then
but this around that you started censoring your own stuff, where now it just redirects you to your podcast. And you actually just got censored recently. I saw
yeah,
that with Dr. Carl Storm. You uploaded a video, I guess because of the title, and then I go back and check, and then it got taken down.
yeah, it's odd because they said it was for hate speech, and there was no speech to the video. There's nothing. I think they might have picked up an image or something, some algorithm or something. And so then yeah, just there's no speech to it. I just because I don't put any material on YouTube anymore. I do links.
Yeah, I can attest to that. My channel got taken down, as you're aware. And I was talking naughty about China, and we had some people that lived in China talking about how the CCP operates, what the COVID lockdown looks like in China, et cetera, et cetera. And they terminated my channel without a strike or any warning after having 5,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. And it's very demoralizing because now here I am trying to rebuild myself. They're definitely messing with my subscriber count, and I'm trying to watch my P's and Q's so I don't get any strikes. And naturally, now I'm trying to veer off and steer everyone to using BitChute, but BitChute's a little awkward in its platform. You can't stream yet. It's really hard to search for certain things. And now they're even going after DLive. I know Owen Benjamin just got terminated on DLive, and DLive's owned by the Chinese. The past year we're using Zoom and DLive. Both things are owned by the Chinese government. So here we are. We're supposed to be the land of the free, with free speech, and people on our side of the spectrum politically are using Chinese platforms.
Which is then interest in use of zoomed, as they say, went way up because of the COVID scare.
Right, and it makes you wonder, why not use Skype? Why can't joint venture capitalists think of another type of tool for businesses? Why are we being forced to use? It seemed like everyone. Oh well, we're Zooming. Oh, okay. Well, I guess Zoom is. Everyone just started using Zoom, not really questioning. Well, why don't we use Skype? Why don't we use this, that, or the other thing? There's other apps and things you could download onto your phone or onto your laptop. It just seems that all the businesses signed up for Zoom without really questioning it.
Yeah, and because then you have students too, with schools where the cameras are being introduced into people's homes, their faces are being recorded. It's all.
It's funny. I was listening to I forgot who the hell I was listening to, but he made a point. I think it was Z-Man. I don't know if you follow Z-Man.
Oh yeah, I listen to his program and read his articles all the time. Yeah,
he's great. He's a great mind. He's pretty level-headed when it comes to certain things. But he made a point. It's like, okay, so I'm paying so much money in property tax for my children to go to public school, yet now they're regulated to using a laptop at home. So why am I still paying all this money in property tax? Same thing goes for healthcare. I'm paying $400, $500, $600, sometimes even $1,000 a month, and I'm meeting a practitioner over a Zoom call. This is not the same service I signed up for.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's about extraction, harvesting, exploitation, and extraction. And you stand back, you see the bigger picture, and you just accept these institutions and their policies they impose upon you, and then you start questioning it. And that's a silver lining to a lot of this past year, is it's exposing a lot of the corruption, and people are beginning to question, whether it's the mainstream media, the corporate media, which is now just openly,
they're all towing the same line. The same Same thing goes for all politicians. I don't know one publicly traded company that's not down for BLM.
Yeah, apparently I read today that the Black Lives Matter was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
An NGO is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, an NGO. Then I said, I quipped. I said, "Is there a Nobel Mostly Peaceful Prize?" I don't know, but I just know, how much property do you have to destroy before you get nominated? How many lives do you have to take before you get nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize? But that thing lost its credibility long ago, if it ever had any. It's just it's when Barack Obama got it for being half black and being elected president.
Kissinger, I think, was another one.
Kissinger was another recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Bill Gates. I don't know if Bill Gates won the Nobel Peace Prize. I know he won the Nobel Prize for probably not being a doctor.
Did he buy it? Like he buys his interviews on CNN and
Oh, he's always on
BBC?
CNN. Did you see him drink his poo water or piss water? Did you ever see that video?
It's just- I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of those types that drinks his own urine.
Well, he's in like Zambia with this monster contraption, how it's processing human feces, and then he goes over to a spigot and drinks poo water, and he's like, "Oh, you never seen that, huh?"
Jeez.
Yeah, going to extreme lengths on how to recycle human feces for public consumption.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll convince people to do that. It's similar. He'll convince people to start, eating human corpses, recycling the food like Soylent Green or something.
Probably a processed human. You
Well, I
see,
mean, that's probably what this fake meat is. That's probably they probably use, fetal tissue cells to develop the hemoglobin to create the fake meat or something.
yeah, there's definitely a heavy emphasis on down the meat consumption. The because obviously Americans, we do enjoy our steaks and pork, and I remember a couple of years ago the UN announced that pork is a carcinogen. Oh wow! So more than half the globe that enjoys pork, we can't eat that anymore. And that we're going down a different path, but I can definitely see where they're taking us with this whole Great Recess, the World Economic Forum, where they're pushing this idea on where we're going to be this Tower of Babel. Everyone doesn't really have an identity. Where like I'll give you an example. Growing up in New York, I was always able to look at someone and identify by the way they look where they're from. Like he's obviously from Pakistan, that person's Irish, that individual is probably from China, so on and so forth. The past 10 years or so, I'm unable to identify where anybody's from. So it's turned into this mystery meat. You're not sure where that person is. He biracial? Is he Hispanic? Is that person actually white? It became quite unnerving, let us say, where I was much more comfortable growing up, kind of being able to tell where everybody's from. Like this neighborhood is predominantly Hasidic Jew. This neighborhood is predominantly Pakistani or Bengali. Now it's been blown wide open, where again they're just mixing everybody. And I think long term the idea is that you're kind of uprooting individuals and trying to basically social engineer for, I guess, the Great Reset one way or another.
Well, the global community, and that's where everyone's all the same in the interest of diversity, and that's all part of this globalization project, where it's legal, it's cultural, and and the global homo agenda, which is not only is it promoting degeneracy, it's also homogeneity and homogeneity, and so it's a way of just it's the world is flat, Thomas Friedman type thesis, and that's obviously a positive spin on it, but it's basically sort of it's cultural genocide.
Correct.
Expanding markets.
Yeah, it's John Q. Publius used to discuss that quite often on his podcast, where they're kind of pushing the neoliberal order, the neoliberal death machine, as he likes to call it, where again, you're not able to identify where anybody's from. And basically pattern recognition becomes a crime in itself, where you're not able to identify the enemy anymore. So if you live in a diverse neighborhood, let's say, it becomes much more hard to identify those that are hurting you or wronging you.
Who would want to do that?
They can have a Julius Kroll. I think that's the town in upstate New York where they all live, but they can have their neighborhood in like Crown Heights or whatever. But if your neighborhood is predominantly white or whatever, Catholic or Hispanic, well, that's a problem.
Well, it gets targeted. It's almost like a hedge fund targets your neighborhood. Same way they target a company rich for a hostile takeover.
Well, that's gentrification. Now there's a huge push against the whole gentrifying aspect of things. It's funny because during the whole lockdown this past year, I see more and more construction vehicles building these apartments, which is part of the conversation me and you had on our last chat.
It's a real estate acquisition operation. Yeah,
100%. And you see more and more of these basically apartment buildings going up that are like basically kinder. Like these things can go up on fire really easy. It's little just put together with some plywood and some sheetrock, really not brick, or they're not aesthetically pleasing, where they're just going to try stacking and packing people. Basically, since the city's got emptied out, it's just a redistribution of the city population into suburban neighborhoods. So what do you do in the suburban neighborhoods? Because there's obviously a lack of inventory and housing, well, you start building, mini high-rises,
Yes, but
3-4
you're
story
seeing a lot of
buildings.
those. Yes, yeah, and that's going to change not only the demographics but the culture and the politics of those areas. And they're already trying to change like zoning laws and in suburban areas. And of
Well,
course,
that's
they say
happened
it's
in
racist.
Minnesota. In
Hmm.
Minnesota, you're not allowed. They basically zoning for single family homes is no longer a thing, and that happened last year. So they started targeting specific suburban neighborhoods and changing the codes and zones around where you're not able to build a single family home. It has to be somewhat of a mini apartment complex with this boutique shops underneath it, or as I like to call the subscription-based economy with the boutique. I'm sorry, the subscription-based economy, boutique, and Taco Bell infrastructure.
Yeah, because it won't be like a small business boutique. It will be a corporate. Or I noticed that you started seeing corporate owned like dry cleaners when in the past those were always small businesses owned by families, and this was a way for upward mobility, particularly for immigrants. Asians was the stereotype, Chinese. And this was a way that these families would establish themselves financially, and the stores were always owned by families. And now there's companies like Zip, which is a corporate chain. And if you see the way that the way that the economy is manipulated, capital markets are manipulated in favor of certain corporations. Catherine Austin Fitz writes about this, and you can the drug flow, the laundering of drug money, and how that affects the economy. It allows these corporations to get pretty much borrow at zero interest rate because it's usually below the inflation rate, and they gradually start to dominate the economy. And they start to absorb these businesses, and they go lower and lower into the economy. And of course, this pandemic and the lockdown was like great leap forward in that area, because this was like a declaration. Before it was low grade warfare, gradual slow burn
Right.
tactics. This was like open warfare. This was like aerial, saturation bombing, direct. And they shut down so many small businesses and restaurants, and these hundreds of thousands of restaurants, and 1 million jobs left New York. I mean, in one state. I mean, think about that. And presiding over this Holocaust were the mayors and governors, who ordinarily you'd say, yeah, they're always parasitical and they're corrupt and they're idiotic, but there's always a sense they want to maintain a tax base. And you didn't this past year. They don't even care about maintaining a tax base.
No, it's funny you mentioned that, because in New York City right now, they stopped enforcing a lot of the local laws. Local laws meaning if you have to do a facade report, make sure no bricks are falling onto the
Mhm.
sidewalks, maintain certain sanitation edicts where you can't put your garbage out on certain days and things like that. They've completely stopped enforcing all those rules. And that was a huge base source of income for the city. And I called the city recently because of a problem, and they told me, "Oh, we're not enforcing that law anymore." I'm like, "What? You're not enforcing it?" Well, due to COVID, we have to wait and see what happens, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm reporting on, like, let's say an elevator broken because of there's lighting that's not working, or the emergency line if the elevator gets stuck. Well, you get fined for that, thousands of dollars. And that actually happened all under Bloomberg, where we weaponized the Department of Buildings. And basically, since due to COVID, they've completely stopped, supplying. The money's dried up. And for whatever reason, the city decided not to enforce these things anymore.
Yeah, they're letting it kind of, I guess, decay, fall apart. And why would they want to do that? It's maybe they have some they figure out of the ashes, out of the rubble will be the 5G smart city or something, and they want prices to fall, so they can be
Gobbled
acquired,
up.
gobbled up at a lower price. And that's you can do that if you have, the political and financial, juice to bring about those results.
Well, they're also going after public transportation. So, like buses now have to be, I guess they're trying to push the whole electric cars thing, electric
Mhm.
buses, electric garbage trucks. Now, even electric post office, those little trucks that drive around from the post office that, I've seen them since I was a kid. Now they want to, I guess, make those electrified one way or another. And it's funny because the whole idea of pushing people into electric cars, well, now you're dependent on the power grid versus a combustible engine where you're a little bit more independent because all you have to do is really throw something combustible to get it to run. So it's a sense of independence with a vehicle. When you're now using a Tesla car or something that's run on electricity, well, now you're much more dependent on the power grid.
Yeah, but I'm sure they'll have a black box in that will record everything and ultimately be able to be commandeered if you misbehave, if the social credit score drops, or prevent where you go. If you're wealthy enough to own a car, because by 2030 we're not going to own anything, it'll be great according to the World Economic Forum, and part of that is just getting people adjusted or suited to the idea that they're not going to own a car. It's
Or eat
that's
meat.
or eat meat for that matter. Yeah, or even yeah, it's like maybe on your birthday. But it's funny because in cities, originally cities, the one area where electric cars might make sense is cities
Right.
because of the short driving distance and the problem with exhaust and smog and all that. But back in the middle of the 20th century, the trolleys, these systems, America had extensive trolley systems, electrical cars for mass transit, and cars were relatively rare in cities compared to today. But a consortium of oil companies and General Motors and some of the automotive companies that got together, and they bought out they started a company called National City Lines, and they destroyed all these networks of of electrical mass transit, and so they could bring in buses. In fact, there was a antitrust lawsuit which they did lose, but they only were fined $1, if I recall. So it was a useless victory. But nevertheless, there was a conspiracy to convert all to diesel and gas-driven automobiles or vehicles in the cities, which then created the pollution problem.
Well,
Which then
Robert Moses played a hand in that. That's for
yeah,
sure. He definitely played a hand in that. It's funny because
but he was in New York. He put the highway through the neighborhoods and all that. Yeah.
that's correct, and that was my chat with Dr. E. Michael Jones. I shared a story about my grandfather grew up in Brooklyn, and there's a big picture of him in his little man cave of him and his brother playing on a pile of rubble from a torn down brownstone, and there's some graffiti on the wall that says "We never saw it coming." And I asked my grandfather, "What is that supposed to mean?" He meant by what Robert Moses did, that him and his family and his friends never expected that their town would get destroyed by the interstate system. And
Yeah.
half my family, funny thing is, half my family wound up in Staten Island that I never get to see, and the other half went to Long Island. Meanwhile, we were all in an enclave in Brooklyn up until the late 60s, early 70s, and then the black crime wave came, and my grandmother was telling me a story that the girl that lived downstairs, the landlord, she was raped by a bunch of Colombians. And when that happened, my family was like, "We got to get out of here before things get really bad." And again, half my family went in one direction, the other half went the other way, and I never ever really get to see them or speak to them.
Which was part of the plan.
Well, yeah, that's part of Slaughter the Cities, where now
Yeah.
you're in a single family home, you're in a car, so you're not really communicating with your neighbors so much. And then Dave McGowan was talking about the whole serial killer aspect of things that rolled around the late 70s, early 80s, where, don't trust your neighbor. They might be a child molester, or, your neighbor's a serial killer. No one knew. So basically scaring the piss out of the general population with things like Son of Sam, and then the Talking Heads had that song "Psycho Killer" that
Hmm.
came out around the same time, and then the lack of trust your neighbors really came full fledged in the early 80s, and that's just another piece of the puzzle where there's a lack of I guess white solidarity amongst the population. Where's the leadership? Who do we turn to? Trump crashed and burned right at the very end. It's like wow, that was our one shot, and he just really just dropped the ball, and it kind of makes you wonder, where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's well, one thing that what the Trump presidency did do, it exposed at least at the end sort of the extent of the corruption.
Yeah.
And the election fraud, and then the events on Capitol Hill in January, and then sort of the response by the political class and the media to this stuff, to those events, and the distortion that they've created about this. They're going to have an impeachment trial for a private citizen.
Well, they're going after that one person on Twitter for a meme now.
Well, that was that guy Mackey who went like Ricky Vaughn character.
Yeah, right.
He made a joke. This is the 2016 election, mind you, where I think he said some crack about voting by text or something, and they're claiming it's interfering in the election. I mean, I don't know how that. I mean, seriously, how they can show up at someone's house and arrest someone, and what's the charge? And you get a judge to sign off on a warrant to do something like that.
Like, were the people that arrested him, were they laughing? Like, I mean, here's the thing, everyone's still sending me these funny memes and stuff like that. I'm like, this isn't really funny anymore, guys. Like, it's fun. It was funny in 2016 and 2017. It's not really funny anymore. It's like if the Capitol Hill situation, if a bunch of guys doing selfies inside the Capitol Hill are called insurrectionists, meanwhile, BLM and Antifa are allowed to, burn down government buildings across the U.S. and they don't get prosecuted one way or another. You're really going to have to start questioning the narrative.
Yeah, and it's beyond the point of being funny, and it's not just sheer hypocrisy. Now they're using, political terror to go after their opponents, and they're politicizing law enforcement, particularly the FBI. Now the FBI has always been political, but now they're not even giving a pretense of even respecting the First Amendment. I mean, it's funny because if you're going to go after social media and prosecute go after people, charge people with incitement or statements they make on social media, it's kind of funny because the current president, he openly admitted to having an extensive voter fraud operation.
I didn't even know about that.
People say he misspoke, and again, Joe Biden, I don't think he's a well man. I think he's declining or descending into dementia, and part of the symptoms of symptom of dementia is lack of inhibition. Mm-hmm. And you're at awkward times you tell the truth. And he admitted there's a videotape where he said that we have put together the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud operation in the nation's history. Now he could get out the vote drive. He misspoke, but I'm saying if you're gonna be a stickler to social media and what's said on social media, what's put out there, he admitted to it right there. I mean, he admitted to the crime. Charge him, but
Kids are playing. Hey, so digressing here for a moment, let me ask you, was there anything that really would be a defining moment in your life where you started really questioning the narrative? Let's say your big red pill moment.
It was kind of gradual. I mean, it was. I came of age in the '80s, Reagan era, and it was the political situation in the country was quite excellent. The economy appeared to be doing well, and demographics are still strong in the country, that sort of thing. There wasn't this rabid anti-white, anti-heritage America culture. It was always there, but it was on the margins. No one took it seriously, really. You'd laugh at it. But I would say probably early 90s with the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall comes down, and I noticed that NATO isn't being dissolved. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of gravitated towards the Pat Buchanan presidential campaigns. So
who Trump hated.
Yeah, Trump did. Yeah, called him a Nazi.
Right.
I didn't know anything about Pat Buchanan. I was like, that's such a crude oversimplification of Pat Buchanan. Irish Catholic American being, yeah, right, okay. He wrote that book, Hitler, Churchill, Unnecessary War, which was a very good book actually. But revisionist history about the outbreak of war, the Second World War. But the starts in the 90s. Then you had the what was going on in the Balkans. Of course, there's the Clinton era. Then you get caught up in the sort of Clintonian corruption. So then you're back in that right-left, paradigm or duality, where it's Republicans versus Democrats and all that. So in the year 2000, I was happy to see George W. Bush get elected. But then in the early 2000s, I started to become aware of some of the intrigues of the Bush family. I became aware of Gary Webb. I mean, that San Jose Mercury News thing, I think it was in the late 90s.
He committed suicide. There's nothing to worry, nothing to see there.
Yeah, he shot himself twice in the head. But before he committed suicide, he was disintegrated. His career fell apart, and for doing the very thing that you think the press is supposed to do. And you kind of get wind of that. Then obviously there's 2001, September 11th, 2001, where initially I pretty much kind of accepted the narrative, broadly speaking, but I was very critical of the reaction. By 2002, I had soured on the Bush administration and the push for the creation of Department of Homeland Security, this expansion of the bureaucracy, the Patriot Act and all that. So you kind of gravitate towards the Ron Paul approach, the libertarian critique of these things. And that it's good because the libertarian critique was very good for things like examining the financial system, banking system. Murray Rothbard, his books on the banking system and these things, the mystery of banking and understanding economics, and sort of the Austrian critique of central banking, and sort of Murray Rothbard's analysis of elite, I guess elite interest and elite scheming, which you could say is sort of prototypical of conspiracy theory. Elite interest, and his book on Wall Street and when the First World War was very good. His monogram on that was very good, or monograph. It's very it's a gradual thing. But then around 2000 2009, I started looking into 9/11 and some of the problems with the official narrative.
Well, Ry Dawson does an absolute knockout job covering that.
Yeah, that's probably the best in his analysis. There's a lot of infighting because debating what happened that day and what we saw that happen that day, and where they're playing.
A lot of people get too focused on that day in particular, and I just boil back to, well, who benefits? Silverstein,
my position
Israel.
My position was that whatever occurred on 9/11, most of us observed it on television, and that's a medium, and that's subject to manipulation, and that's as far as I go.
So talking about 9/11, so my godfather survived the Trade Center attack, and I occasionally ask him about it. It's kind of a touchy subject. But I asked him, well, when you left, obviously you had no way of contacting anybody. You had to walk over the Manhattan Bridge. What was going through your mind? And he says, well, I was over the bridge getting over to Brooklyn and try to use a payphone. What was going through his mind? He goes, man, we are so going to go to war with Saudi Arabia or Jordan or one of these Middle Eastern countries. And when he got home and he turned on the news and then he realized, well, it was an act of terror. He was like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? War on terror? Where do these people come from? What country? Who gave them this? All these, gave them the ability to attack us instead of this, this invisible enemy like COVID, where these never-ending wars. So when he told me that, it kind of gave me some juice in my tank as far as starting to question certain things.
Yeah, and idea that there's elusive a boogeyman. It's almost like COVID. He's there, he's not there.
There's a Muslim somewhere.
Remember the network of caves in Afghanistan? These elaborate cartoons they presented to the public about this, almost like this Bond setup of Dr. Evil under the volcano, and
they call it a compound. They're in a compound in Pakistan.
And, these network of caves and fortified and all that never existed.
Well, I do remember that night on 9/11 watching the nightly news, and they were reporting on the local cable network about the van on the George
Yeah,
Washington
yeah.
Bridge.
Mhm.
I'll never forget that. I remember watching that with my family and then gone. Never heard about it
That
ever
was
again.
Urban Movers, right?
Yeah, no, it was a different van that was caught on the George Washington Bridge. Maybe it would have, I think it may have been Urban Movers.
Yeah.
But
It
yeah,
was
I
the
do recall.
Raleigh connection and all that.
Yes,
And
Israeli
Rye
connection.
Dawson gets into like the Kushner family and their speculation on New Jersey real estate just prior to that. And because that gets into the Port Authority, which is sort of this Jewish criminal operation. But that's what the World Trade Center was with Larry, Lucky Larry Silverstein,
Silverstein.
and
Yeah.
his connection to Bibi Netanyahu, and he happened to not be there that morning. He had a dermatologist appointment apparently or something. I don't know if that's ever been confirmed or not. It was
Well, Andy Nowicki brought up to me about that whole thing about how he would Silverstein would always be
yeah.
at the top, having breakfast, and he just happened to have a doctor's appointment. I go, wait a second, and it is Andy Nowicki talking. He's like, well, wait a second. If I'm a billionaire, wouldn't the doctor come and visit me? Can you picture a billionaire sitting in a waiting room? Like, it's like, if you had that kind of money, doesn't the doctor come to you? You don't go to him.
Yeah, I mean, this is funny because it's what one element of 9/11 is it was an insurance scam. Basically, it was Jewish lightning. The
Right.
the attack on the Twin Towers was Jewish lightning, as they call it. And Larry Silverstein, who I think has got his start with owning strip clubs or topless bars or something,
Mm-hmm.
and he became sort of this real estate guy, and I think he buys the lease that summer for $100 million, and by the end of the year, he's getting a $5 billion check or something.
Right. Yeah, he took a huge insurance policy out
Yeah.
on the buildings. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that whole day into itself is a deep rabbit hole. But again, who benefited? We went to war with Iraq. There was that one woman, Launder, who was Susan Launder, I think her name was, and she wrote a book how she was basically kidnapped for a year and a half and was heavily drugged because she was outspoken about what had happened on 9/11. And she was in talks with Saddam Hussein, where Saddam Hussein says, listen, I'll help you find a terrorist. If you guys can bring some capital over here, help me rebuild the country. I'll help you guys find whoever did this, so on and so forth. And when she started talking about that out in public, they basically kidnapped her, not under her own volition, and they basically wrote her off as a quack and
Mm-hmm.
that she was a nut job and don't listen to her. She went on a book tour about what had happened really on that day, and it really makes you wonder because Iraq didn't really have anything to do with 9/11, and here we are in the escapades in Afghanistan still, and obviously now with the new administration, you can expect more of this type of war on, I guess, tribal people, such as the Taliban. I read in the news today about Biden is going to take a hard stance against the Taliban, basically undoing Trump's push for some type of peace deal over there.
Yeah, here we are, almost 20 years later.
How much money?
Yeah, and I think she was the cousin of the guy who whispered into George Bush's ear.
So you do know who I'm talking about?
Yeah. She
Okay,
was
cool,
the cousin
cool.
of the guy who whispered into George Bush's ear when he was at that elementary school reading My Pet Goat about the attack. So supposedly informing him of it.
So for me, I started wondering what the hell was going on. Was Sandy Hook and Gaddafi being killed? And I remember seeing Gaddafi being dragged around the streets, a dude with a Yankee hat on with his gun. And I saw my dad. My dad kind of looked really upset about Gaddafi being killed, and I'm like, "Well, hey, we just killed a evil dictator. Like, why do you look so sad?" And my dad was like, he was like, Gaddafi wasn't that bad of a guy. He was actually a really good person. He did a lot of great things for Africa. And that, I'm in my early 20s, and I could really give two shits about politics. Everyone talking about Obama. The Tea Party was a big thing in 2009, and then 2010, 2011, 2012. Where we're getting into this whole Arab Spring thing where apparently some street vendor in Tunisia started this uprising. It's always this grassroots bullshit. It's like these things just don't happen out of thin air. And then you see Benghazi, Gaddafi, and then obviously in my own home with my father's reaction towards these things where he's sort of like wondering like what the hell is really going on. And one thing led to a next, and I started researching these topics more extensively.
Yeah, and of course, I don't know who claimed ownership of the aquifer there, or Libya's gold hoard, which it was just a kind of a shakedown or robbery of that country, and then they create this I guess arena for civil war, and then you start getting the migration crisis into Europe.
Well, you get a power vacuum. So power
Yeah.
vacuum in Iraq, power vacuum in Libya. These countries obviously are not fit for democracy, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. This idea of a technocrat manager in a suit and tie is now the go-to for democracy. That's supposed to represent some type of democracy. You see, like that guy Sacha Baron Cohen came out with a movie, The Dictator, right around the same time us going into Syria, basically mocking leaders of these regions, where a guy in a general's uniform is something bad. Even kings or queens. We don't have kings or queens anymore. Everything's now this parliamentary system, democracy type of form of government that most of the world is not really built for. Other nations are not really meant for these type of ideas. And once you start going down that path with democracy, well, you find a chink in the armor. You find that technocrat who was educated in the West. Right. So he obviously has ties to whatever universities back in the United States. I know with the Free Syrian Army, FSA, in 2012, 2013, the people that Hillary Clinton basically handpicked to run the rebels in Syria. Well, you research on who these people are. They haven't been in Syria in 30 years. One guy lived in Texas. Another one lived in Illinois. They have no allegiance to Syria. Who are their allegiances really to?
Well, that's like, yeah, they were probably trained at the London School of Economics or something. Yeah, and then they're installed like Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, and they're flown back in. And it's when you mentioned Sacha Baron Cohen, he's the one that during the spring when these protests against the lockdown started occurring, he showed up. He crashed a anti-lockdown protest and sort of mocked the people there and started.
Well, they mocked Giuliani too.
Yeah, and he does that. And you mentioned kind of he put out a movie, and you mentioned like the Libyan, and everyone. I remember in the '80s, Gaddafi was the mad dog of the Middle East, and it was the showdown, the line of death. And of course, it was we bombed, Tripoli. The United States did. Reagan ordered the bombing in a response to an alleged discotheque bombing, I think, in Italy, I think, or was it Germany, in Europe. And it turns out that was an Israeli operation.
Well, two things about Gaddafi. One was that we smart bombed his home and killed his children.
Yes.
I think one of his children. And then the whole Lockheed, the Boeing crash in Scotland.
Yeah, Lockerbie, yeah.
Lockerbie, and when he did an interview, I think with Larry King, that he gave all the family members that died money as I guess he felt bad, and Larry King was like, "Well, obviously you were behind it. You gave the money to those families."
No, because they imposed sanctions on the country. They were blockading the country for it.
Okay.
They blamed this guy because they found his shirt. Apparently, he passed a radio on to one of the passengers, a radio with a bomb on it, which blew the plane up. But I think it might be, is it Susan Lindauer who talks about there's another element to that the that whole bombing might trace back to an operation in Lebanon, and there was a CIA operation that involved the hostages, and in order to operate in there was the CIA had set up a drug running operation as a front to sort of get them. This is the problem of these intelligence operations. It's get all in these murky operations to inveigle yourself, get involved in it, and then these operations take on a life of their own, particularly if you're involved in heroin. It's very lucrative. And what happened was, I don't know if this is true, but I heard they had something involved where the CIA agents who were involved in this weren't trying to get the hostages. They were trying to keep them there so they can keep their operation going. And what happened was, I think it was the military intelligence got wind of this. I think it was Army intelligence got wind of that, and they investigated it. And the details are kind of fuzzy on this, so there might be a little bit, but I think what happened is they went to Lebanon, got the proof of it, and the people had evidence that were flying back to the United States on Pan Am plane that exploded over Lockerbie. So the whole story might be something completely different what occurred over Lockerbie, Scotland, on December 1989.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that story to really go into detail. I focused a little bit more on Gaddafi in a little bit of his background.
But
on the
Libya
whole
was
thing.
blamed for it. But it was funny, that discotheque bombing, which was why Reagan bombed him in 1986, ordered the bombing, was that discotheque bombing, which was an Israeli false flag. And
Wow.
they had set
And-
the beacon, which made it look like it was Libyan communications going, and so we blamed the Libyans. Now, I don't know if the U.S. government knew about it or not. Obviously, there's enough infiltration, and particularly Israeli infiltration within the U.S. government. It's even hard to separate it now. It's probably worse now than it was then, but that's why.
It was when they first started getting their foot into the door in the U.S. politics during the late end of the Reagan administration. I think you made a good statement about what George Bush Sr. had to say about, like, he was wringing his hands, like, what can I do? I'm beholden to the Israeli lobby.
Yeah, and he was pressuring Israel because he wasn't a devoted Zionist,
Right.
and he was I think putting pressure about the settlements, and they rewarded him by arranging for his election defeat in 1992 to Bill Clinton. They tanked the economy.
They blame it on that he didn't know about the checkout machines in a supermarket, and that's what.
Little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, his administration was just an extension of the Reagan administration. As we can see, what Biden is just an extension of the Obama administration.
Yeah,
but
here it was the Bush administration, the first Bush administration was the extension of the Reagan administration. The problem is George Bush had taken over the Reagan administration, so it really was a third term of the Bush administration. Since Reagan was shot in 1981.
You did that chat on an old one, Bush killing Reagan.
Yeah,
that was a great chat you did. I'm definitely going to put that in the show notes.
It was particularly, I mean, the fact that the would-be assassin, his brother was going to have lunch with the vice president's son the day after, and that just gets a couple mentions in the press. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, nothing to see here. Prior to Gaddafi being killed, he did the speech of the UN, and obviously the mainstream media labeled him as a quack, a nut job, crazy dictator. And there was another meeting, I think, with the Arab League or whatever it's called, and he was yelling at the Saudi king, "You're a dog of Israel," and they muted his mic, and he got up and stormed off. And behind him, everyone's dead silent, but the only person that was like laughing and cheering him on was Assad. It was like, yeah, keep going, keep going. Mm-hmm. So, basically you start talking smack about the ruling class, the powers that being, you're gonna get overthrown.
Well, they don't want any leader. They don't want Arab nationalism or a coherent, functioning state. This is part of the Odan plan, the Israeli plan, dates back to the early 80s, where you break up these states, break them into microstates, dysfunctional states. So all of Israel's enemies are weak, and so you don't want a strong. And look at the Iran-Iraq war. The U.S. fomented that at the behest of Israel. So they got Iran.
The destruction of the Ba'athist Party. I mean, Assad's the last of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this pan-Arab socialism where it's a coherent body. It's a stable form of government. And you obviously have to break that up and introduce Wahhabism and some type of radical orthodoxy into the region. In a sense, now you're giving credit and credence towards the war on terror. Like, well, look what ISIS is doing. So you got to go over there before.
Yeah, there was that meeting in Jerusalem in 1978 where allegedly George Bush, then out of government, attended it. I think Netanyahu was there. And the idea was by the late 70s, they knew the Cold War was winding down, and the next phase was going to be the war on terror. And you saw that
the transition,
that in the 80s with the media. If you watch like Back to the Future, right? It's the crazy Libyans,
Right.
right? The crazy Libyans, and you saw those movies in the 80s and 90s, of course. Crazy Arabs factor a lot in movies with terrorism. So they're transitioning, they're preparing you for this stuff. It's predictive programming. And not to mention all the examples of sort of predictive programming regarding 9/11 and various, imageries and movies and that you point
The
out.
Simpsons.
The Simpsons. There was the Lone Gunman episode, even record albums. Some of them are a bit of a stretch, but it is interesting that all these images would appear. There's a picture of, I think it was a 1968 Newsweek magazine with David Rockefeller. He's in his office. He's in an office and in his window, and it's the site of the soon-to-be World Trade Center that's being built, which is another story in of itself why that was built. It was very controversial at the time, but it's the new era of banking, and his watch, the hands are in 9/11.
And no one really sees these things.
Yeah.
Devon Stack, I follow him from time and again once in a while, check to see what he's saying. And he shared a video of Project Runaway, a clip from last year of this model named COVID, and he's wearing a mask. Come here, COVID. Come here. Show everybody what you're wearing. And he's wearing a mask, and his name's COVID.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have like the contact tracing contract was sealed in the summer before this. That congressman who I think went to Africa to negotiate a contact tracing contract or something, a U.S. congressman, and so a lot of these, not to mention all the like Event 201 and these things where these things are foreseen. Not to mention all the particular programming regarding pandemics.
Well, the normie con sees these things, things like the World Economic Forum. They see like these various foundations, TED Talks, things like that, and they believe that it can't happen to them. Like, oh, it's just them having a meeting. It's an excuse for to go on a vacation, funded by whoever your employer is. So they don't. Most people think what they see, like the World Economic Forum and these various meetings like Bilderberg and such, they don't think it pertains to them, when in fact it really truly does.
Well, what do you think happens when the world's wealthiest people meet? They summon the world's politicians and the world's journalists.
They just talk. They don't conspire.
What do things happen? I mean, come on. I mean, obviously they're planning to they're developing strategy. It's a and they're formulating policy. It's whether it's a steering committee or whatever, it's happening. And it's funny that Davos gets some publicity, but never any critical analysis in the press. Bilderberg used to be a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, now you can actually go and they see all these tinted limousines, bulletproof SUV trucks pulling up to the gates, going in to have these meetings.
Yeah. And what do you think? And the reason why you don't hear about it is because the people that, the editor of the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or CNN, they're at the meeting.
Right, and they're on the payroll.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. Do you think perhaps due to COVID the past year, do you think globalization has run its course and it's coming to an end?
Well, I think it was an attempt to, I think, to bring about its consummation, but I think
accelerate it.
Yeah, accelerate it. Kind of, and obviously, global pandemic, global response, and the fact that 193 countries shut down their economies simultaneously already suggests you already have a global octopus of sorts that can order these things. There's some level of governance that simply we're not aware of or made privy to. And that's a big problem that people have to address, that there are decisions being taken that affect us all that we don't even understand. We're not even allowed to know that they exist, but they're occurring. And that's something that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because that's not what they're taught in their civics textbooks about how government operates and how we vote and these things. whether or not it was a bridge too far, or they're going to choke on it. Hopefully that is the case, that they've exposed them, they've revealed themselves. I think there's hundreds of millions of more people now are aware, or at least awakened to it. I think understanding of it may not be well developed or well formed, but it's a lot better than we were the year before. It's an hour of maximum peril. It's also an hour of maximum opportunity to wake a lot of people up. And a lot of people are woken up. It's a jarring experience for a lot of people this past year. I mean, it's almost like for me, I'm not the type to do it, but it's almost like I want to say, I told you so.
Well, it's quite amazing. Like, people don't realize that they were able to shut down countries as big as India. It's right. Like, how do you have the ability? Okay, we're shut down here, but so is Italy, England. Mm-hmm. It does seem to affect mostly the Anglosphere. I know places in Southeast Asia that they don't have a lockdown. I mean, they did have one over the summer, but eventually they kind of let up and all right, go back to work and do what you got to do, because these countries are relatively impoverished and they don't have.
They can't.
Right.
They can't indulge that. They live hand to mouth, day to day, and they can't do that. They're not getting COVID relief checks.
Right.
They're not. The government
they can't paper over the economy as well.
Yeah, we paper the economy because the dollar is it's the most indebted currency, but it's still the world's reserve currency, or at least de facto. And that's part of the reason why what's occurring, because that was ending in 2019. The whole China trade thing and the debt bubble, and they had to end it. And how do you do that transition? You can't do it honestly, nor can you reveal to the people what's really going on. There's too much secrecy, and they can't tell people how the game's really played. So they got to create a fake pandemic.
Right. So the bond market was selling off, I think, in September, October. Yeah. There was a problem with the derivatives market. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was obviously something lurking in the
the repo market had frozen.
That was it. The repo market started to freeze.
And then you had this Jackson Hole in the summer of 2019. You had a meeting in Jackson Hole. The bankers said they wanted to go direct, and what that means is they're going to start pumping in money into the financial markets. And you can't, if you do that, of course, that's might create a run on the dollar, create hyperinflation. Not though if you declare a global pandemic, shut the economies down, and at the same time start. One of the reasons what they're able to do is they can pump money, and it's part of the debt trap. Mm-hmm. Catherine Austin Fitch has written her quarterly report. The state of our currency covers this. Members of her group get this, her report, and she says what happened is at the same time you're shutting the economy down, destroying local economy's tax base, you're running up the debt. Mm. So income is dropping and the debt's going up. That's obviously a recipe for the creditors coming and take everything. And that's where you get that plan out of Canada, where there's a plan. They say that's at some point they're going to do a sort of a debt relief plan where people will renounce all ownership if all their debt's paid off. So it's
I did see that in a report. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the economic hitman model, but basically applied, throughout the world, throughout the West.
It was so funny when the pandemic hit. I think Mnuchin got right out there and says, it's okay, we're going to give everyone loans. And surprisingly, I couldn't believe how many people were just so excited to take these SBA loans and the PPP loans, payment protection loans out. Even some of my good friends, they're giving me $500,000 at 2% interest. I'm like, dude, that's not a good thing, because that means they're going to own your own business. Yeah. Why would you want to do that? What are you celebrating about? Yet, a lot of boomers were just like, show me the money.
And then what they do is that weakens resistance or opposition to the lockdown, to the COVID thing. It eases everyone. It's almost like a narcotic.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're okay with your election being stolen now because you got your SBA loan.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And of course, the stolen election is a product of the pandemic, because they were able to create conditions with mail-in voting, and that they could pull it off.
Going back to what I was asking before about if you think globalization is coming to an end, the reason why I'm asking you that is because if you look at the lifespan of the Soviet Union, so it ran from 1917 to 1991, that's a little over 70 years. That's the same as a lifespan of a man.
Yeah.
And you see what globalization, you got like people like Kissinger who's in his 90s, George Soros if he's still cognitively able to function. I know his son is kind of taking over the reins, which is Brzezinski passed away a few years ago. So the people that brought about globalization in the first place are now aware of their own mortality. So they're probably, in my opinion and from my analysis, they're accelerating this because they want to see this come to fruition.
Yeah, it's part of that transhumanist effort too.
Right.
Push because they want to upload your self consciousness to the mothership or something and
The
somehow become
cloud.
to the cloud and become like God. So ultimately, it's a Luciferian. It gets us back to that. They want to be like gods.
Well, okay, that's one way of looking at it, and I agree with that analysis. And the reason why we look at it through that prism is because we have no idea what the hell is really going on. No one's. That's what brings us to having these chats, is because we can't. We're not being fed the correct information. We're not
Mhm.
being told the truth. We have no idea what this vaccine is. Now they're saying that we have to wear two mouth diapers instead of just one. And what did you say? What Atwill today was, you're getting an anal swab for a respiratory illness.
Yeah, they've in China they recommend an anal swab for respiratory disease.
So
So
what you kind of see is that a lot of these people, the ruling class, the powers that being, people like Feinstein, Pelosi, Schumer, Biden, Trump, even like Maxine Waters, who represented parts of L.A. during the L.A. riots in '92. These people are old. These people are old. The average member of the House representative of I'm sorry, the average member in the House of Representatives is almost 60 years old, and the Senate is representatives in the Senate is over 60.
mhm.
So these are the oldest Congress in United States history. So these people don't want to like let go for one reason or another. The old guard refusing to give up power and give it to the young people, and you see those in my generation are quite pissed.
Yeah, they don't realize, and they're putting walls up around Capitol Hill, and it's like they're building moats and they're putting walls up, and they don't see like the events. They don't look at the protests where you have hundreds of thousands of people come to protest, not just on behalf of President Trump, but also to make their voices known on their concerns over the election, and no one's impressed by that turnout. But what they do is they go, oh, these are insurrectionists. You know, we need to build walls to keep these people out. So they're putting a permanent wall around Capitol Hill, around the Capitol building. This is the people's house, and they don't see the optics there. And this is just how aloof they are, or how distant they are, from the people they supposedly represent.
Right,
They don't represent them.
they're in their own little echo chamber, like, oh
Yeah.
yes, transgenders, this is what we need to do. They're, like I think again going back to Z-Man where he talks about growing up in the '60s and '70s. Well, a local politician would show up in a supermarket and you can talk to him about these things. You don't have that ability anymore. I don't know the last time I would can recall ever even meeting a politician. They drive around, they have security guards, they're unable to really
Yeah, they're
get.
trying to push. They're trying to get to pay more. Here they have such a heightened. They've used this little kerfuffle on Capitol Hill that seems like as if they feel threatened. Well, first, if you do feel threatened, you might want to rethink your politics. You might want to think what you're doing up there. Why do the people? If you're a popular elected, why are you so threatened? And it's a sign, a bit of the political class just being sort of detached from reality in their own little bubble, and that's Washington D.C. It's like it's a different existence.
I experienced a little bit of that with people that work for foundations and NGOs, and I've met those type of people in my past life, let's say. and they give awards to each other. Look at, there's a new award, and again, it's kind of like an excuse to get out. You get paid for a meet and greet luncheon, things like that, and you go to a 5-star hotel where you hear some wealthy philanthropist go on about human rights and things like that. Again, these people live in a disconnected reality. Again, going back to the NGOs, NGOs in India, they're walled off from India. They'll say that they saw an impoverished boy, selling, selling something in the street, and then they'll blog about it from a Starbucks. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you talk to the kid? Why don't you get to know him? Maybe even learn his language. But a lot of these people, again, people that work for these type of groups, they're well funded, they're paid well. And they do it as a means to try to elevate their status within that hierarchy of bureaucracy in foundations and in government.
Yeah, it's doing well by doing good. It's like the Clinton Foundation or something, or the Biden Cancer Research Foundation, which turns out they spent 99% of their money on like salaries and administrative costs, nothing on research.
The thing is that in the United States, especially for people of my generation, like let's say if I was still in New York and I would have bought a house a year ago. Now I'm looking back on it in hindsight. I'm like, wow, thank God I did not buy a house in New York. Mm-hmm. So a lot of young people don't know where to really put their money. They don't know where to settle down. We're constantly being, moved around to various locations now with the diaspora of people from California and New York, moving into other locations that were ethnically homogenous. In Idaho, they're having such an influx of people from California that even I think the mayor of Boise was like running a campaign about keeping people from California out of the state because it's going to wreck the community. So it's come to a point in the United States where it's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. That you think you're going to go live off the grid in Arizona or something like that, but you're not going to be able to really disconnect yourself because of social media and the internet.
No, there's no getting away from it, and then you have to, these refugees from California and New York show up in your state and they change your state, and often they bring the politics, of that state. I think parts of Texas have experienced that. I think parts of Arizona have. Colorado is a good example of that. Idaho is experiencing it now. The South has experienced that. Of course, Florida did. So it's it's one of these. It's not that you're running away from it instead of dealing with the issue in their home state. Stay back in California and kick Gavin Newsom out of office. And kick Barbara. Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris. The California mafia. But no, they just want to leave after they've let these people ruin the state.
Growing up, there was always these town hall meetings, and no one would ever go to them. Mm-hmm. And you can go online and go to the local government website and see what the hell they were actually talking about. And I used to take an interest in it because I wanted to see what type of rules and regulations that were coming down the pike. And basically, a lot of it was Agenda 21, sustainable development. And,
yes.
And unfortunately, they're having these town hall meetings at like really awkward times, like 5 o'clock on a Wednesday. Well, the average person, working a 9-to-5 job is going to be exhausted, and he's not going to have the energy to go to a town hall meeting and raise a fuss or a stink. So local governments were able to start pushing these nefarious agendas underneath everyone's nose because no one was really taking a active, being part of it, participation.
Well, part of that is the obsession of like national politics or global politics, when really what's going to affect you more is local politics, and it's the idea of opposing globalism locally. This was hatched at the Rio conference in 1992.
Yeah.
And this was the idea of Agenda 21, where you have the appearance of these initiatives acting, being thought out locally, but really all part of this top-down approach. I think it was Agenda 21 that developed this International Council of Local Initiatives, ICLEI.
ICLEI, yep.
Yeah,
Well, ICLEI's in the background now. ICLEI did their job. Not many people realize that ICLEI's done. They were kind of like the pathfinders. They laid down the groundwork for a lot of these things, and they don't really have much of a say anymore, from what I can tell. And that was kind of my bread and butter. Was studying Agenda 21 because I wanted to see, like, why are housing prices going through the roof, and what's this again, the subscription-based boutique economy with the Taco Bell infrastructure. So it's like,
Yeah.
why are they opening gay bars near the church? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on here? And you start wondering and questioning this, like, well, why is this happening? Like,
Well,
most
they started things like sustainability, which they created, like you get college degrees in sustainability, so you get the propaganda, and also you have sustainable communities. And this was the I think President Clinton signed this, and also various governors have signed sustainability agreements. And this
it's grants from the federal government. That's where it first came down. Then
So
they
it's
put these
basically
unelected bodies, these councils, to start implementing these things.
So they're getting, the federal government just prints money, and so they can devote resources to these things. And local governments are more or less co-opted or bribed to go along with this. And, whether it's bike rental share programs, they pay you to put bike, to narrow the lanes so you make driving less convenient. So you put bike paths through, or bike lanes.
They cause traffic. They deliberately increase congestion.
Yes, and there's actually, these are urban planners now are like, it's almost like they're making it worse. So they're making it less livable. And you, if you can go online, you find out if your community is a sustainable community signed on to Agenda 21. They're devoted to implementing these things, these programs.
Yeah, well, if they have a pride parade in your downtown, you signed up for sustainability.
Yes, and I don't know how they construe homosexuality as being sustainable, but that's because it's population control. That's why.
Well, they spend.
Yeah.
Like the homosexual spends, and that's again, the downtown core, where basically your vacation is now in your downtown community, where you can just buy drinks at a 300% markup. And that's the unfortunate aspect of that is that there's no place for heterosexual men to get together now. So the downtown core is geared towards homos and, I guess, young women, and they just do selfies.
Well, that's all part of the atomization, because healthy heterosexual men getting together, they plan and do things. They get things done, right?
Well, now they just play video games.
Now they just play video games, yeah. And they'll get together, and this is all part of the, the Knights of Columbus, and it's all part of these things that communities used to have, and they lead their community, and they realize there's a community to defend. But the problem is that or to have that, you have to have an ethno-religious identity, and that's being, of course, the that's not allowed anymore because everything has to be diverse. You see.
Well, I do agree with Dr. E. Michael Jones. Having an identity, and obviously for me, because I'm still a descendant of immigrants and such, and no one talks about how Joe DiMaggio's father's fishing boat was taken away from him because he thought he was a fascist. So when did Italians become white? Well, 1945, when the Italians sided with the Allies. But I think it's important for people to have some type of identity, no matter what. When you identify as a white guy, you're already kind of on the wane and losing the battle. So
well, you've actually adopted the identity they've given you.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, and because the white guy is the deracinated, European American, whether and some of that was going to happen anyway because Irish are going to intermarry with the Italians and vice versa, and the Germans, and a lot of that speaks to the religion they shared, Well,
and yeah. Well, I wanted to bring it up to you. One thing I've taken away this past election is no one, neither side, whether it's Democrat or Republican, brought up the Hispanics.
No.
Like they seem to just run parallel to the clown world, and more Hispanics are intermarrying with the native population. So how are you supposed to attack white supremacy when everyone's kind of mixed blood with people from Mexico, Colombia, and places like that?
Yeah, that's always been ever since. The United States decided to gobble up, parts of Mexico in the 1840s. That was, not only was America going to have a large Catholic population, that coupled with the Irish influx, but it was going to be that area. But what I think what really changed it is that, given what America is, this mosaic, if you will, it was highly decentralized, and you had enclaves that had a certain amount of sovereignty to this, in their enclaves, and so it was a good modus vivendi, that could have perdured. But the problem is the people that ran the country had bigger plans. And that was the American Empire. And they had to homogenize, and this brought in, mentioned Robert Moses and interstate highway system, and the rapid mobility. While it provides a tremendous amount of economic opportunity, it also destroys community, and it creates atomization, which makes society easier to manipulate.
Going back to Moses real quick, they had a BLM protest next to Robert Moses's statue in a nearby town, and me and my friends went to go and check it out, and they were trying to dump red paint on Robert Moses, and I got up and told all these BLM protesters, most of them, none of them were black, mind you, which was just hilarious. And I made a point. I'm like, hello, over here, BLM protesters. Yeah, white dude speaking. Robert Moses was a Jew. Okay, and everyone that lives in this town used to live where you live now, in meaning the boroughs. So do me a favor and get out. And that was it. The conversation ended, and they kind of like said a couple few words there for like another 2 minutes, and they left.
Well, they just saw a white guy statue.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They don't really understand the history behind these things. And again, that kind of ignorance is bliss, where most of these young people supporting BLM, they don't really truly understand what the hell they're actually supporting. And there's this whole attitude still permeating across the United States, where it's each is to his own. If it doesn't affect me or harm me, why should I care? Unfortunately, I think going forward, you're going to have to somewhat pick a side.
Well, that's another thing is you may not be able to, draw these distinctions, historical, and draw out these nuances if they're going to paint you white and treat you accordingly. You may be forced to pick a side. This is what war does, right?
Well, yeah, in the Vietnam War, you had obviously blacks and whites fighting the Vietnamese, so you can have KKK written across your knuckles, and the other guy could be a Black Panther. It didn't matter, because the Vietnamese look at you as, you foreigner, what are you doing here? It's like, they don't really care about you being black or white. You're the enemy.
Yeah. And so, the whites are uniform, and now they're creating now this is all part of I think, of a plan just to sort of to maintain a state of low-grade civil war in the country.
Cold Civil War.
Yeah.
So
to drive these, this is why you had this sort of outburst of Black Lives Matter, corporate-funded, elite-funded, Jewish-backed 1619 Project. It's the blacks that are doing it, they're just proxies, because they don't have any real political power. But it's done sort of as a certain to bludgeon the white majority of the country.
Going back one moment with the Hispanic thing, how do you think that once the Hispanics become more of a larger voting bloc and gain a little bit more power, whether it be financially or politically, how do you think they would react to a lot of these social upheavals? Because I can tell you, for one thing, they are not down with a lot of these social engineering aspects, whether it be the homosexual agenda. I know when they tried pushing the whole Latinx thing, that crashed and burned really hard. So I just find it funny how we're kind of ignoring them altogether, and it's still this whole black-white battle. Meanwhile, you have Chinese, Indians now, and other ethnic groups. Where do you see that playing out as far as the Hispanics go?
Well, was Donald Trump? He got how How much?
He got more. I don't remember how many he got, but it was. I know in Florida he won the Hispanic vote.
Yeah, and he doubled the black vote from his vote from in 2016. Yet he still lost. He gained 11 million votes and he still lost. It's funny how that worked out.
Well, Biden's the most popular U.S. president. Like, what do you
Well, it's other things because a lot of the Hispanics, they're that term again is I don't know if that's what they're called. They don't like immigration.
Right.
A lot of them because it's undermining their own. It's funny how that happens.
Well, I can tell you in New York, they started unionizing. They wanted higher wages. So as soon as they started getting uppity, they started dumping people from Asia into the area.
It's what they always do. That's how you weaken labor because labor you break down solidarity in the labor pool, and that way you can weaken the union or prevent a union from being formed. That's an old strategy, dumping in cheaper labor. They're not going to cooperate, and that's divide and conquer.
Well, a good portion of the Hispanics left during COVID because many of them work in restaurants as busboys and such.
Yes.
So if you go to like a restaurant now, you're given like a plastic spork.
Yes.
And my grandfather, who was a union organizer back in the day, we went out to eat, and he goes, "You want to know why they're giving you paper plates and plastic forks?" And I'm like, "No, why?" He goes, "They fired the dishwasher."
Yeah.
You just save money.
That's funny. And also the construction boom caused that too. Remember when they created the housing bubble, that drew a lot of labor north because there was a demand for construction labor, which also resulted in lower quality construction because everyone's putting houses up too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't
Well,
the best.
Pablo's a roofer and a landscaper.
Yeah. And so I was driving down the road with my wife, and there's a sign outside the house that goes, "Thank you, Jesus." Oh, that's nice. They're religious. No, they're thanking their landscaper.
Thanking Jesus. I do find it very interesting that the Hispanics, again, how they kind of just run parallel to a lot of these, woke pause ideas. For whatever reason,
like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tries to do that, and it just doesn't quite work. It's like,
well, they don't take her seriously. I really truly don't. It's that she is Puerto Rican. Her father ran a discrimination racket because he did brickwork for a lot of condominiums and apartment buildings, and every time he didn't get the bid, he would sue the condominium or the landlord for discrimination, and that's how he was able to make his money. And then move to a affluent white suburb. And she's dating a ginger. She's dating a redhead, and no one really wants to talk about her Irish boyfriend.
And is her family Sephardic?
I heard that. I don't know. I didn't look too much into that. I have heard that she might be of Sephardic descent. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if that was the case.
I always get a kick out of like someone like that condemning Western imperialism or colonialism or playing that card because look at your name. I mean, Cortez. I'm sorry. It's like it's what you are. You wouldn't exist if it weren't for imperialism or colonialism.
What's frightening is that she's around my age, and they say, well, she's the new millennial. She's the up and coming generation. I'm like, she's just one person. But the scary part is, if you look and see who's in the wings once these politicians enter their twilight, like Feinstein, who's I think her mental capacity is greatly diminishing. These people that are coming up are very radical in their politics.
Well, it just goes to the argument that people are going to have to start to decoupling themselves from that system. Meaning that you're going to have to try to make that system as irrelevant as you can. And,
well, if the state
that's not just a practical thing; it's a psychological thing.
If the federal government and the states begin to fail, you'll start seeing more of that, where we could start looking more like our neighbors in the South, like in Mexico and Brazil, where police just don't even bother going in. One, they don't have the manpower. Two, they're not
Hmm.
getting paid enough. So why even try enforcing a lot of these different rules? And that would be the best way to opt out of it, where again these communities start segregating themselves away from federal interference and such. But I think with the ruling class and the powers that being, especially with the bank aspect of things, where they dollarized the world, it might look like we're entering a new paradigm where it's like perfect competition, where Target is no different than Walmart, Amazon's no different than
Yeah, yeah.
eBay. So where we're kind of rooting for some type of
Well,
economic collapse going.
it's not that you have to completely ignore it, but if you put half the energy, let's say half the, if all those hundreds of thousands of people who showed up in Washington D.C. to protest the January 6th, reading in the electoral votes, if they had put half that energy into starting their own food co-ops and gardens or education systems,
Mm-hmm.
or even
Start being more self-reliant.
yeah, or even their own currency, local currencies. This is where just half that energy. Not saying you have to ignore it. My point, they'd be in a stronger position because that way, whatever they do with the Great Reset and the digital currencies, they have their own means of support. And starting, networking with communicating with your sheriffs, find out who your sheriffs are. These things, this is where local politics really matters because there you have a chance. Your local system, even at the state level, then there's no chance in Washington D.C. In really get anything constructive done because that's not what it's for. That's self-evident now.
Well, I don't know if you can still elect your sheriff. I don't know if that's the case in a lot of neighborhoods. I know it's not the case in New York. You used to elect your sheriff. You used to be beholden
Yeah.
to the community. Now they don't really do that. Where now the police officer is from a few towns over, and he has no
Well, yeah.
real
Well,
connection.
counties do have sheriffs in their constitutional office, and they are making a difference because, like in California, you have 5 sheriffs not enforcing any of the lockdowns.
Hmm.
So, practically speaking, Newsom is like the Fuhrer ordering orders in the bunker.
Oh, he looks like a psychopath. He looks like the what's that, American Psycho.
He does. Yeah. He does look like that. Yeah.
I pointed that out early on. I go, this guy looks like a lunatic, with his bleach white teeth and perfect tan, and I think he's part of the Getty fortune,
Yeah, the Gettys created him. Yeah. So.
right? And then you have someone like Cucker Tarlson, who's part of the TV dinner trust fund baby. So, all these people that have a lot of money, people on TV, politicians, what have you, they are still part of this ruling class. And
Well, yeah,
going back,
Z-Man made that point in his talk. Yeah, they just
yeah.
think they don't know anything about you, or what your problems are, and but what that didn't used to be the case. I mean,
Well, they were beholden, like a king and a queen were beholden to their land, because if they didn't do what the people wanted, they would get killed. Same thing with the Romans. So many Roman emperors were killed because they just didn't do what they said that they were going to do. Now they get parachute money, and they wind up going into the private sector, and they're not held accountable at all.
no, and someone comes to Washington D.C. and it's like the farm boy who's been to Paris. How do you get him to come home? And they wined and dined, and it's that system. It's the swamp, and
French Laundry, like I think
yeah.
that's what it's called. Yeah. When you're on that level of wealth, you have nothing to really worry about. And I always say that on this live stream, is that when you're dealing with people with tens of millions and billions of dollars, you're basically, you have nothing to really fear. Like, okay, I crashed my car. Oh, I just buy a new car. Oh, my house burnt down. I'll just buy a new house. I'll buy 10 houses. When you lack that type of mindset, where you're in a constant state of not so much fear, but something can go wrong financially for yourself, your mindset changes. And that seems to be the case with a lot of these people at the very top, where they socialize the losses. And a hedge fund, the point of, you're hedging your bets. If you lose, you don't get a bailout. So there's no risk anymore for a lot of these people.
No, and it's like capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. As someone once said, and you saw that with was it John Kerry when he was talking about the Keystone Pipeline thing being shut down by Biden, and he just cavalierly says, "Well, people just go get another job."
Right, during a lockdown with 50 million people out of work. It's great.
And the stock market can be at 30,000. With during in the time when the economy contracted by like 30%. How's that possible?
Well, didn't Trump say like on his last day, and the stock market's at 30,000? How he just kept cheering on the stock market while everything was crashing and burning around him.
After the election, at some point, like in November, early December, he came out and announced, that the Dow hit 30,000. It was great. That's
a part of me thinks that was him pacifying boomers, because a lot of boomers still have a lot of their money tied up in the stock market.
Mhm.
And I was always under the assumption that boomers would start cashing out at this point in time, and the stock market would kind of start going into a bit of a recession. But that seems to not be the case
well,
now.
they'll just pass $6 trillion bailouts that BlackRock will process, and they just pump money into it.
Well, BlackRock now, this is going back to the whole energy thing. Now that BlackRock has so much money, when now they're they're becoming large shareholders in energy companies, and now they're dictating Exxon, if you don't adhere to sustainable energy, well, we're going to terminate the whole board and put our own board in. Like, wow. So basically the financial sector is looking to destroy certain aspects of the composite, the Dow Jones.
Yeah, and we have these, I guess, a company like Exxon is actually involved in actually making something, whereas the financial sector, they don't do anything. They just
they don't. They just it's just perpetual debt, and you see New York City, Wall Street merging with Silicon Valley. That is definitely coming to fruition. There's no question about it.
I mean, it's an unholy alliance, and this financialization and everything leads to that because it breaks away from reality.
Yeah.
And you see that with the stock market. And you see it, and you can push these various agendas without even passing any laws. You're seeing that with the corporations, whether it's global homo, whether it's politics. You can suspend free speech effectively just by cutting off people, not just deplatforming them, but cutting off from financial services. Even congressmen and senators are being denied access to hotels. If they don't
Kurt Schilling.
Kurt Schilling's insurance policy. And I heard an interesting proposal by Dr. Joseph Farrell about the problem of corporations themselves, which is in itself an entity, which is a problem. It's a governing issue.
They become bureaucracies into themselves.
Yeah, and they're states into themselves, and they're political entities, and they're engaged in sort of metapolitical social engineering, and that's a problem that we all, from a governing standpoint, it's a problem that needs to be addressed, that the right-left paradigm doesn't really handle, because this is something the corporation itself is a artifice, or it's a creation. It's a legal fiction that's created, corporate personhood and things like that. But the Dr. Joseph Farrell said that in order for a corporation to exist, to have its charter, it must adhere to the Bill of Rights, like the government. And that would solve a lot of these problems. Meaning that they couldn't talk about, well, it's my company, it's my platform, but that sort of thing. Free market. No, you have to adhere to the Bill of Rights to do business in this state or in this country, and that would do away with a lot of this deplatforming, which is a form of depersonalization. Yep. Depersonalization of people, and that's what's happening, and that's being done at a corporate level. Where people are being denied services that you can't access. It gets to a point where you won't be able to rent a hotel room or rent a car or even have a job if you don't have the right politics.
Well, you don't actually have to have a social security number or a social security card, but good luck doing anything without it. And that's And you see with the COVID, where maybe they stick that on your passport. Well, you're free, but you're not able to really do anything unless you have your COVID passport.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I heard today that the CDC just came out and said they're mandating wearing masks on public transport. Now, I don't know if the CDC has any regulatory authority I thought they were advisory. I don't know if they can make people wear masks. I'm like,
Well, they're extending the moratorium for rents.
yeah.
Like, I
So
didn't know CDC was in charge of real estate.
what power do they have to do that? I'm interested in the legality of them, making these specious claims about public health emergencies, that using as a pretext to tell people they can't collect their rent. Is there a moratorium on mortgage payments too?
Yes, there is. That's correct. There is.
And so, I mean, but what authority does the CDC have to order that? I don't know what the legality of that is. They can advise, and then the FAA can respond. Airlines can say, okay, we'll follow these guidelines. But I didn't know the CDC was given, this authority just to issue diktats that we almost follow.
Well, they know everything about real estate estoppels. What are you saying? Of course they. It's funny, you bring that up. 2 months ago, I had to take a flight, and it's my first time going on an airplane since COVID broke out, and the flight attendant, the person working the terminal, said, "Everyone line up and take your cell phones out." I'm like, what? Take your cell phones out? Scan this barcode. And I didn't do it. I mean, I would, if anyone said anything, I'll say, "Oh, my phone's dead," or "I don't have a cell phone." But everyone lined up and scanned their barcode without ever questioning what the barcode was. So then I get on the plane. I didn't scan it naturally. Like, for what purpose do I have to scan anything? And while on the flight, they handed out this paperwork for you to fill out about contact tracing.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I didn't fill it out. I was like, I'm not filling this out. And there was like 4 National Guardsmen at the end of the terminal asking everyone to take their papers out. And the National Guardsman stopped me and asked where I was going. And I go, "Oh, I'm just connecting flight." They were like, "Okay, see you later, goodbye." It's like everyone's just following these orders without actually questioning them.
And it's almost like it's a bluff. Like, people will just follow. It's almost like that. If you put on a uniform and show up somewhere and start ordering people around, they'll start obeying you because you're in a uniform, even though you have no legal authority. It's almost like people just, okay, well, I'm being told to do this. I got to get on the flight, and I don't have, and so I got to.
Someone carrying an M16, therefore they're an authority.
Yeah, in a sense. Well, in a way, they are, I guess. Not an authority; they have power. But again, it's there to. I think a lot there to intimidate you, and most people will just follow along with that. Again, it all goes back to holding them accountable to saying, what basis do you declare this emergency? What science do you have? And are we in the middle of a pandemic? Okay, what's the proof for that? And the problem is, the more you look into it, the more you realize there's no there, and it's all one big bluff.
Right, and then we're taking advice from a obese Jew in a flowery dress.
Yeah, and it's again, you have a guy who claims to be a woman demanding that you pretend he's a woman too, and he's going to be issuing advice on health. I don't know if, strictly speaking, transitioning is healthy. But I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to say no, it's not healthy. And I wouldn't listen to anyone who claims to be a medical authority tell me that it is healthy, both physically and psychologically.
Yeah, 100%, man. Listen, I think we're at like an hour and a half. I'll let you go. And before signing off, I want to thank you again. You've been a great inspiration to me. I definitely want to have you on in the coming future.
Sure. Yeah.
And we'll certainly be in touch. All right, Tim?
Okay, great.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Okay, you have a nice evening then. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay, thanks.